morning, everyone. My name is Karen Daniel, and I have the honor of serving as Arlington Thrive's board president. On behalf of my fellow board members and our team of dedicated staff, we're so excited to welcome you here this morning for what will be both a thought-provoking and an action-inspiring discussion about one of the most important issues facing our community, and that is the lack of access to affordable childcare. We are honored to be joined this morning by so many distinguished guests and community leaders, including our county board chair, Katie Crystal, several of her colleagues, and leadership from the county, from Arlington Public Schools, the Department of Human Services, and so many other nonprofit, public, and business leaders who care so much about this community. Since 1975, Thrive has been a leader in providing emergency assistance to our neighbors in need and helping prevent financial crisis from turning into financial catastrophe. Working with and through our partners, many of whom are in this room today, we have been able to connect and help in every corner of the community. During the pandemic, Thrive played an even larger role, helping direct millions of dollars in local and federal assistance to people who needed help with preventing eviction and further hardship, while at the same time, through surveys and focus groups and interviews, we learned so much more about the families that we serve and the obstacles they face on an ongoing basis. Through this work, we realized that we have to do more. We have to do more than just being there for families at their time of crisis. With our partners, with experts, and perhaps most importantly, with the families that we serve, we must find long-term solutions and pathways to stability. We are so happy to have you here with us today for an event that is going to generate energy, collaboration, and solutions to make a difference in this community that we care so much about. It is now my pleasure to introduce Thrive's Executive Director, Andrew Schneider. Since joining Thrive in 2016, Andrew has helped lead Thrive from our original staff of 3 people to our current team of 18, including case managers, social workers, navigators, and program officers who support Thrive's vision of a community where all have homes, all are financially stable, and all thrive. Andrew?
Thank you, Karen, and it's always dangerous to put me in front of a microphone, but I'll do my best. Thank you to the entire Arlington Thrive board and for your support of our mission and the work that we do in this wonderful community. And on behalf of Thrive's entire team, we are grateful to work for such an amazing organization. As Karen said, Thrive works to support the community in multiple ways, both through our emergency assistance and by also looking for ways that we can help find long-term pathways to stability, like we are doing today. We have over 30 nonprofit partners. We work closely with the Department of Human Services, and we are grateful to work with many, not only in this room, but members of the faith community, including Clarendon United Methodist Church, who we are partnering on one of our initial childcare partners and who are Pastor Wines is in the room today. We are grateful to be having these opportunities with all of this support, and we would really like to acknowledge the support and the foundational work that the Community Foundation has done through research and advocacy and partnership for more affordable childcare specifically, and more generally on behalf of the residents of Arlington who are most in danger of being priced out and left behind as our community continues to prosper. A thank you also to George Mason for not only hosting this event today, but for their commitment to Arlington, their thought leadership on regional issues, and willingness to partner with Thrive and all nonprofits for the betterment of our community. And thank you to Virginia Housing for their financial support of this event and their incredible commitment to affordable housing in Arlington and across the Commonwealth. I'd also like to make a special note to thank the entire staff of Arlington Thrive, many of whom are in the room this morning, for their dedication to Thrive, to their fellow colleagues, and to the families, individuals, and partners that we have the opportunity to serve with every day. In addition to our development team who produced this event from the get-go, and this was our first event in 3 years and our largest event in 7 years, and on a topic that we're just getting involved in, so there was very little that could go wrong, right? We have representatives from our operations team and several members of our programs team, including Kathy Paul, our director, and Javaria Henry, our recently hired child care coordinator, who many of you have had a chance to meet and notice in the hot pink. Finally, I would like to thank the Washington Forest Foundation, not only for their sponsorship of this event, but for their long-standing commitment to our community. We're here today in this room because of a conversation that I had with Allison Ertl in the summer of 2021, where I made a small request for a small bit of funding, investment, if you will, for research and exploration of how Thrive could make an impact on affordable childcare in Arlington. And while we still feel like we're at the very beginning stages of that conversation, of that effort, of that working with you all, that first step would not have been possible without that vision and without that collaborative step with Allison. And we are very grateful for her, for the foundation, and for their entire board for that vision and that shared vision. So I'm honored that Allison has agreed to say a few words this morning to us all. So thank you, Allison.
Good morning. I'm not always at the podium. I'm usually quite hiding behind the scenes in this community, and our family has been doing so for over 50 years and over 100 years in Arlington as a business operator, the B.M. Smith Companies and family. I've been running the foundation for almost 10 years, and we pride ourselves on the support we give to over 65 organizations, mostly working in and around Arlington in all areas from economic development, access, safety net, education, after-school programming. But really, we're focused on youth and families and helping people live the lives they deserve to live in our community of Arlington. It sounds very broad, but we do a lot of general operating. But the sweet spot for me is always when we find those gaps that the organizations are trying to meet. Groups like Thrive, the Arlington Community Foundation, where we can collaborate and support an effort that's really much larger than the work of the foundation. We're a staff of one and now two other family members. So our time and capacity to really be out and about is sometimes limited. So we seek the strength and expertise of the nonprofits in Arlington to show us what they are doing, what needs to happen, what's not working, how to think out of the box, how to think differently and creatively about a solution that we're all facing. We've helped fund the Community Foundation Safety Net Report, out of which one of the big efforts was the failings and challenges of childcare in our community. So I won't stand between what you all are looking for, which is quite a lot more data and leadership and expertise on this issue, as well as our eminent board chair, Katie Crystal, who is a good friend and also a behind-the-scenes collaborator with me and the foundation. We have coffees and talk about how to change things and make things better in Arlington and what's working and what we want to try to fix. It's a very inspiring conversation that we like to have together. So with no further ado, I would love to have Katie Crystal come speak to you. Her work in women and childcare far exceeds anything that I'm going to share. And Amina sent me volumes of things, but I think we all know where her work is focused. So Katie, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Allison. Thank you, Andrew. Good morning. Thank you to Thrive for having me, for having us, for all of you, for prioritizing this issue. One of the most compelling analogies that I heard during the Build Back Better legislative debates was describing the similarities between childcare and the traditional roads and bridges view of infrastructure. Because what is the economic value, after all, of roads and bridges, if not getting people from where they live to where they work? And for millions of American families, childcare is a bridge as essential as any physical overpass from getting to where they live, from home to work. Childcare, as everyone who is here knows, is infrastructure. During the pandemic, middle-class and economically privileged parents were plunged into the kind of daily stresses that have always faced and continue to face our low-income families. With childcare centers shuttered and schools moving online, families were forced to curtail their workforce participation, either temporarily or permanently, swap child-minding favors with their neighbors and networks, rely on sometimes precarious multi-generational arrangements, and in general manage the crushing cognitive load of trying to figure out where their kids could go the next morning. I know that for Thrive's clients and for many low-income parents, they are far too expert in this calculus already. And for them, the struggle did not end when schools and childcare centers reopened post-pandemic. I will say that I am proud of the progress we have made on childcare supply in Arlington. When we first convened our childcare initiative in 2017, our data suggested there weren't enough spots in licensed facilities to accommodate even half the county's population under 5 years old. By reforming our local barriers to providing childcare, that meant reducing parking requirements and realigning our standards to the states and streamlining permitting. We have helped make meaningful progress towards closing that gap, expanding the supply of childcare by 40% in the past few years. By redesigning our licensing requirements and launching a free training program, Arlington has also sought to support childcare workers, overwhelmingly women, women of color, and immigrant women, in advancing their careers within the field. But for low-income families in particular, the struggle remains. Among those thousands of new spots added, only 24 in one center take subsidies. This is our challenge as a community, but also as a region and as a nation. And we have opportunities to try to address the need for affordable childcare at the local level. A couple of examples: at the board's direction, our county staff are now working on a call for projects to use up to $5 million in funding that we've allocated to projects that could deliver long-term committed affordable spots, so to speak, in exchange for capital investments, not unlike our bricks and mortar strategy when it comes to affordable housing. There is more to be done through incentive zoning to encourage developers, like recently Amazon, who are not only including childcare facilities in their buildings, but supporting or requiring their operators to accept subsidies. But I wanted to share a couple of food for thought comments, especially as we lead into this panel that has such expertise beyond just Arlington, to suggest there are a couple of headwinds for any community, even one as committed and progressive and interested as Arlington County, to solving this problem of affordable childcare at scale. The first is the interdependencies within the childcare market and across jurisdictions. We know, for example, when DC introduced universal pre-K for 4s and 5s, we heard a giant sucking sound from our childcare workforce in Arlington County into the district. I have supported, I think, calls for national pre-K or pre-K as part of APS or Virginia schools, but I will tell you that what worries me is without dedicated attention to a workforce that is already in shortage, a universal pre-K program can truly cripple our ability to deliver care for our youngest. I will also say another issue, another headwind that I think about often, and I know is got to be true for Thrive and its clients, is the complexity of our subsidy systems and any local subsidy system we might address. You know, we do have hundreds of spots of affordable childcare through the Virginia Preschool Initiative, through Melinda and her colleagues at Northern Virginia Family Services. But as I know so many of the families that are served by our social safety net providers could tell us, what they don't necessarily need is an application form and a promise of childcare and an idea to close the gap. Thanks, Janet. An idea about how to close the gap, right? They need a childcare center that is open for them to drop in on when they have an opportunity to pursue a job training program or go in for an interview. I will also say, in speaking only for myself, conversation about the complexity of subsidies, we can't talk about affordable childcare without talking about income supports like the childcare tax credit, because we need to give our low-income families the dignity of choice. Middle-class and upper-income families have the choice about whether to have a parent stay home or send them to a childcare center. And many times that is the most culturally appropriate or the most desired choice by our low-income families. When we talk only about childcare or childcare centers and subsidies as part of that solution, we are denying many of our neighbors the same choice that is available for other families. And so that conversation has to be interrelated with large-scale questions about income supports. And finally, and most importantly, when we talk about the headwinds for a mere locality to solve this at scale, is that the biggest cost of providing childcare, especially quality childcare, is labor. To support families by keeping terribly low wages, that's no victory at all. And we know that there has to be strategies beyond what we can do within our 26 square miles to attract people to the profession and to compensate our early childcare workers to the degree that they deserve and that they earn. So in short, there is more that we can do to solve this problem, but we cannot do it alone. And that's why I am so glad to get to stop talking and cede the floor to experts, especially those who have national expertise in this conversation. I am convinced that in a nation that built the federal highway system, we are capable taking on this infrastructure challenge of childcare for our low-income families and for unlocking economic opportunity. I am really looking forward to hearing from them, and I thank you again to Thrive for having me this morning.
Thank you, Katie, and I think that's exactly right. We are here because we want to move the needle. We know it is not going to be easy, but we also know that we have a lot of great ideas in our county, and we know that we have a lot of great ideas in our country. And so we are delighted to introduce our panelists now. I will announce them, and then I will bring up our moderator. We have Dr. Betsy DeMolder from George Mason University, Ann Hedgepath from Childcare Aware, and Melinda Langford, as Katie said, from Northern Virginia Family Services, who is in charge of Head Start both in Arlington and throughout our region, and then Rashid Malik from the Center for American Progress, in charge of their early childhood education program. So with that, I'd like to bring up our moderator, Krista Jones, who is also, amongst many, many things, as many of you know, the founder of Vote, Lead, Impact. So Krista.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you to Arlington Thrive for convening this really important conversation. I think a lot of us know that the issue of childcare and early learning and care is not new. The problem, the system has been struggling for a while, but the pandemic obviously laid bare to a lot of those issues. And so it's really important that we're having this conversation at the local level as well. Because as we heard and Katie referenced, there's been a lot of conversation at the federal level. Unfortunately, we didn't get the child care funding and legislation that we wanted, but we're hoping in the future we can do that. There's also a lot of efforts at the state level. There's philanthropy who's getting involved, obviously here in Arlington as well. The business sector is getting involved, but the local governments, there's definitely a place for local government and localities to be involved as well. We're really excited to have this conversation. And, Katie talked a lot about the complexities of subsidies. And I'd love to hear from our panel, what are your initial thoughts on how we are handling subsidies at the local level in Virginia?
I'll start because I think subsidies was a big part of my trepidation with the Commonwealth of Virginia for a time. We operate Head Start and early Head Start programs. In Arlington, we opted to operate 10 hours a day, 12 months a year. Federal dollars don't cover that. They cover 3.5 hours a day and 8 months of the year. And so in order to be able to provide that care so that families who needed to work who worked out throughout the DMV, so you can't get back in time enough to get your child, so you need child care subsidy. And at probably it's been about 4 or 5 years ago now, the child care subsidy area had what I thought was an arcane requirement, which was that the applying parent for subsidy needed to report the absent parent to child support enforcement in order to be eligible to receive child care subsidy for the child. Which was, I spent so much time in Richmond trying to understand that. And not until the pandemic did that really change. Also, the Virginia Department of Education took the DSS portion of child care subsidy under education. And so that wasn't removed. It's still in the manual, but it's not a practice now. But that devastated programs like mine, who would be open all day, because the families who needed that were families who were not necessarily joined together or living together. But look at what position that put the mother in if the father was supporting them but wasn't paying it through child support, or if the mom had an issue with domestic violence, so she's going to turn her absent partner in to the state government. And most importantly, the final conversation I had with some folks in Richmond is, why should the child have to suffer? And more importantly, then I said, let's talk about it economically. If the child is not in a quality preschool program, they are not ready when they go to kindergarten. And how much money are you spending in remediation So the system has, from my perspective, has changed in the last 5 years, but it was really, really difficult for families who actually needed to access subsidy. And then for a provider, if your parent didn't sign in or swipe for 8 days, you had to try to go back and get that, or you weren't going to be paid for that. And no, you can't pay you for training your teachers to be close to training your teachers. Well, why not? Wouldn't you like them to have quality teachers? So, yeah, I could go on and on, but I'll stop.
Bring up, an important point in terms of how childcare has often been seen as like a family issue. And even as we try to advocate for it, a lot of people still think of it as a personal family issue. And that looks like how the system has gotten involved. But one of the good things about moving it to the Department of Education is starting to look at it more as an educational issue. You just mentioned it as an economic issue. Right? So it really is a multi-pronged issue. So thank you for highlighting that.
One of the limiting factors that now has been was that a parent who was applying for the subsidy was required to already have a job and to be working and have evidence of that work. But so now that has changed so that now you're eligible to apply if you are searching or if you're going to school, getting some training of some kind. So that is a real progress, I think. Lots of problems still, but that's progress.
The reality of the subsidy system is that it's complicated, and it's complicated on both the family or parent side, and it's complicated on the program and provider side. Childcare of America is a national organization, and we work with childcare resource and referral agencies across the country. They exist in every state to help support all sides of the childcare system. We provide referrals, and in some states, even subsidies are part of the subsidy system. And we're also working with programs and providers to work through registering their businesses, becoming licensed, getting professional development, and yes, participating in the subsidy system. And I think that in having that view, there are so many things that we stop and ask ourselves, like, why does it have to be this hard? We recently worked with, or the U.S. Digital Response Team put together a journey, a map of what it looks like for families to go through the process of accessing a childcare subsidy. And they did it like a transit map. So for those of you who are urban planners or work in community development, this will be familiar to you. At each point along the way, right, there were offshoots and branches. There were a lot where families never made it back to the main trip. It partially was the problems that have been named so far. What comes first? Access to childcare or a job or finding the slot or knowing you can pay for it? And those complications all along the way end up with so many families not making it into a program, finding a spot for their child, not making it then to a job that they may have had the opportunity to access, or whatever else it is that we're supporting for that family member to be able to go out in the world and do. And I think that one of the lessons there, and this is present in this report, is that there are ways to change that equation. There are simple things that we can choose to do at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level to change that journey for families. From very simplified applications to choices around who is categorically eligible for the subsidy, meaning you qualify for something else, we don't need you to apply or recertify. There may be some federal requirements that until they change, we have to sort of fit ourselves into. And believe me, I'm working to change those federal requirements too. But there are ways that states have done that. The flip side is we also have to make the purchasing power of subsidies worth it for programs and educators to be able to sustain their businesses. And if we learned anything through the pandemic, a rescue plan or relief funding that came out primarily in the form of grants to programs were a lifeline. When you know you have money coming in, when you can pay your bills, where you can guarantee that regardless of a couple slot fluctuation in your enrollment or attendance, you can have your high quality staff on site, you can operate your program. And when you're relying just on a payment that's based on a market rate, which is the case in most states, a market rate that may not actually reflect the cost of high quality care because it more than anything reflects the downward pressure of the lack of affordability in a community on the price of childcare,
that subsidy is not purchasing the kind of childcare or the stability in a program that we need. We wonder why programs don't take subsidy children. It's because the subsidy isn't particularly effective at sustaining the business and the program and the quality we need. That does take resources. But as I mentioned, grants and foundational support for programs can also fill in the gap. So while we work to bolster subsidy systems and make sure that our childcare programs on the public level have the resources they need, there are also a lot of ways to get directly into childcare programs and give them the operating support they need. So subsidy does purchase then the time and the energy of the incredible educators or some of the facility or other items that go into providing care. It's a puzzle, and I'm sure, Melinda, you could talk more about that. I know, Betsy, you've been a part of making that math work. Those things are all part of why the subsidy system doesn't work right now, and there are solutions that can fill the gap until we can get a wholesale change on the program.
I would only add just an interesting bit of historical context that many of you may be aware of, but our childcare subsidy system really came out of welfare reform in the 1990s and the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Restoration Act, right? There was personal responsibility was the name of the game at the time. And this has defined what the childcare struggle is for those trying to find childcare to make their lives work, and for the childcare programs who are trying to help so many families, but in essence losing something in helping those families in many cases. And so the personal responsibility aspect has only become sort of a burden on parents and communities. And it is encouraging, though, that this narrative, I think, has changed over the past several years and more through a lot of people's hard work and consciousness raising to show that this is a crucial element of our local and everywhere's national economy, and that childcare, educators and the people who run childcare programs are crucial pillars of community.
And are there any other recommendations that you all have for local governments, things they can do to incentivize providers to accept subsidies and to increase the supply of affordable childcare?
I mentioned right from the start that there is, I think, a lot of room for us to talk with programs, educators, and providers about what kind of resources will help them keep their doors open. So what would it take to pay all the bills and ensure you have staff to resource things like early childhood mental health consultation or the kind of social emotional learning supports that programs need, to have a substitute pool in the county or in the community? Those things can be done outside of the subsidy system itself, and they do help us think about bolstering the supply or at least retaining the supply. They could also make it possible for more programs to participate in the subsidy system because they ensure that those programs have the ability to keep their doors open, even with piecing together a lot of different resources. I think when it comes to supply building, there's some other creative ideas, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the strength of a mixed delivery system is really important. So that's not just our large centers, our national franchises who do great work and are able to spread the costs and reach economies of scale. It's also our smaller programs, our in-home programs, our family childcare operators. There's so much room to ask them what they need. And I think that's such an incredible place to start when it comes to local and state level planning.
I would agree with that because I've been an early childhood educator for a number of years, and I don't necessarily think that every child ought to be in a childcare center. I think that there's great subsidized care in a family daycare, and that they should be seen on the same scale and level and financed the way a brick and mortar program would be. And I would ask also that there should be actually a real partnership between public schools and childcare, because somebody's got to pay if something hasn't worked out. You're either going to have remediation dollars, you're going to be dealing with behaviors that the partnership isn't as strong as it should be in the community, in all of the communities that I serve in, to recognize that when you don't have quality preschool programming, your schools are not going to be the best, or you're going to spend a lot of money bringing kids up to that space. And quality preschool means supporting parents in supporting their children, in supporting parents in parenting. No one gets a manual. You don't. And so you do what was done with you or what someone else that you look up to did. But supporting parents in the childcare process is as important as providing spaces for children to be in childcare. So I think a better collaboration in the communities between the education, the public schools, and what they are hoping and needing for children coming into the school system would be a great place to start.
Just adding to that, one of the ways that my research team thinks about childcare access is kind of a framework of 4 different criteria for childcare access to be effective. The first one is that parents need to have reasonable efforts or require reasonable efforts for that access. Beyond reasonable, the whole system falls down. Second one is affordability, of course. Third is it meets the needs of the families. That's huge. Scheduling, age issues, all of those kinds of things. And then the fourth one is that it actually provides healthy development for children, as you said. So thinking about that framework, it's easier to identify where are the misalignments in a community where all 4 of those things aren't happening. And it also provides a framework for thinking about what can we do along those lines. And so one of the things, there was a study done by the Virginia Department of Social Services in 2018 that surveyed all the childcare providers in Virginia. They didn't all respond, but there were over 1,000 who did respond. And they identified the ones who had subsidy parts of their childcare program. The biggest challenge was that families weren't taking it up. They weren't using the subsidy. And so part of the problem is finding ways to help parents know about and access those subsidies, as you were saying, make the applications easier, have people like Fairfax County has a program that has community support for ambassadors. Community ambassadors who are liaisons with the community, helping them to figure out where access is. There are also community advisory boards that are wonderful opportunities to have families partnering with programs in order to identify the things that they need. They know best what they need so that there's not those misalignments between the programs and the families. That framework really helps me to think about where do we need to go with all of this. It's not just affordability, it's families connecting with those programs in ways that are effective for them.
So let's switch to talk about our workforce. We all know that our early educators and our childcare providers are overworked and underpaid. And in fact, according to the League of Women Voters 2022 childcare study, early educators in Virginia with a bachelor's degree are paid 22% less than their K-8 peers. And 40% of childcare workers are experiencing some level of poverty. What are some successful strategies to attract trained staff and strategies that work to grow their skills and earning power?
I'll start because we have the luxury of being a federally funded program. And so part of our funding is dedicated only to the training and development of our teachers. One of the great pathways, especially here in Arlington, a lot of our teachers were parents in our programs, and we're able to go through the CDA program and the AA program based on the funding by the federal grant. And so we've been able to build and retain a quality staff because we were able to invest in them. And that's my other point about the partnership between public schools and childcare programming, because you need a quality staff to support the development of children and to support parents in their parenting questions in order for children to be ready for school. And it is devastating what childcare providers earn that work in childcare centers. I have 2 community partners in another county and they are not able to pay. They have 7 days off. That's the federal holidays that they are paid. There is no health care. There is no earned leave. And we are supporting them in raising their rates because they were paying less than $17 an hour for staff. So it is an underpaid population.
I definitely think there are a number of things building on what Melinda was sharing about where the gaps are. I do want to name something first, though. We've been all using the term quality, and I think many of us have been trying to make the connection, but I want to make it very clear. The thing that makes programs high quality overwhelmingly is the staff. It's the people every day who come to work, who have interactions with children, who are thinking about child development and have the resources and the support and the peer-to-peer learning and the credentials to do the work well. And the idea that sometimes we talk about how can we make childcare cost less as a proxy for how we make it affordable for families, I think is a little bit of a misunderstanding, right? The goal isn't for us to have a race to the bottom on how we resource childcare. It's to understand how the various ways we fund it can fully support the cost of high quality childcare. And the cost of high quality childcare means high quality staff. And it means paying them well and thinking about recruiting and retaining. And so I just want to say that because I think every strategy that's being shared here is very much in service of that piece of the puzzle. When we think, though, about our educators and our staff, I do think that localities and states have a role to play. There's a lot of room to build things like scholarship programs, articulation agreements, think about what the career ladder for an educator looks like, and to live that in a community with the kinds of support that's needed to help people thrive. You have to consider, too, their time outside of work. And if our safety net isn't strong, if our community resources aren't strong, if educators cannot find childcare for their own children, how do we expect them to be able to come and care for ours? And I think those pieces add up. And they're all things that, there are ways that we can work towards solving. I also think that at the end of the day, local areas do have the ability to supplement compensation in a way that can be effective. So that can be through additional grants, additional funding. There can be ways in which we can relieve the tax burden on those families or consider how compensation absolutely comes along with any of the investment in credentials, training, or things like that. I really also think that the community of educators that we can build in local areas can be really powerful. And I see that power in advocacy, which is a big part of the work I do, is what does it look like for people to see, to feel part of something, to feel both within maybe the program, but even within their community, that they are able to advocate for themselves, that they're respected and heard, and that they have self-agency in their careers and their journeys. And that can be a value that can also then be lived through the structures we create in local areas, be it councils and committees, the voices we put on our local boards or our community collaborations. When we do development planning or community planning or economic development, where is the childcare worker or educator or program director in that conversation? Those are all really interesting questions. And I think that some of that can go a long way to then finding the right solution in your community.
I think you make some great points, Ian. I've talked with providers and they simply want to be seen as early educators. So often they're referred to as babysitters or daycare workers. But they're with our children. They're trained, whether they have a bachelor's degree or not. They've had experience in early childhood education and they should be treated as such. So excellent points. Rashid, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I live in Arlington and have 2 kids who are now just out of childcare age, but it was recent enough that I can say our childcare programs in some parts of Arlington are lucky enough to have very well-resourced parents who can afford what it costs to pay teachers what they need to get by here. Probably, I'm sure they would still and deserve to make more and like to make more. But even in the programs, say, that my kids went to that were fantastic and were very expensive, we still didn't have very much infant care. That was a non-existent at one of the childcare programs we were at. And that can be a major kind of employment off-ramp, especially in a country that doesn't yet have guaranteed paid family leave. An investment in infant and toddler care to some extent. Sometimes these are hazy definitions and phases but in that first year and a half, people are really struggling to find what is also really high skilled workers for that kind of, which is also education, right? Like, this is a continuum of human child development that is all educational, all play is educational, all of those interactions between educators and babies are crucially important for childhood development. And that, if that's not happening in the highest income sections and neighborhoods of Arlington, you can imagine the challenges that many, many families are having, the kind of things that they're trying to patch together. And this runs exactly counter to what we know is best for babies and young children, which is that continuity of care, the consistency that they thrive under. Sorry to keep you thrive, but probably.
So I'd love to talk for a moment about government zoning and regulation. What are some innovative practices that you all have seen that local governments have used to reduce operating costs and achieve more affordability in childcare providers' budget?
I'll start this time. So I've been trying to tell everybody who's working with a budget or thinking about how to fit childcare into their set of priorities to consider it in every possible section of the budget, right? So physical infrastructure investments, right? We have a big new federal physical infrastructure spending. We need to make sure that those workers have childcare. We need to make sure that every stage in every kind of sector of our economy is considering the sort of necessary workforce supports that would include childcare in terms of workforce development, in terms of higher education spending. Student parents need childcare. People, there's millions and millions of people working towards their degrees who could achieve them on their timeline if they have access to consistent, reliable childcare. To think about here in Arlington, we have, some, and I think are working towards more childcare for teachers. We just had the big open up. Yeah. Amazing. And for nurses and for everybody who we know needs it and is struggling for it. So all departments, sometimes investments in childcare have helped situate a little bit in workforce development, a little bit in education, a little bit of human services, and they never quite get to where they all individually want to. So maybe we just need to make it everywhere, I don't know, throughout the budget.
Love that. Thank you.
I know we have localities across the country where every planning effort that comes together has to have a childcare component, that is a requirement. And ultimately, just like we ask about, will there be enough parking spots for your facility or business? We could be asking, how many childcare slots do you expect your workforce might need? Whether or not that can, help move the requisite funding, the facility building and things like that is a really interesting question to make sure we're asking ourselves every time we make a decision when it comes to our economic development planning. I told a few folks already, I ended up down the rabbit hole of an old Washington Post article from 1995. And some of you may remember when this happened, when they built the Shady Grove Metro, a part of the planning requirement was they ended up requiring that a child care center be built across the street. And it was a public-private partnership. And so as the metro station was built, the building across the street ended up with a child care center. While the funding came from some public funding, but also from a number of corporations and federal agencies who had workers who would be commuting from the Rockville area into DC or somewhere else in the area and using Metro potentially. Slots and brick and mortar were part of the commitments, and that program still exists. It's a kinder care center now, and I realize that many of you have probably been a part of similar efforts on smaller scales and larger scales, but it's not new to do that. Every time we talk about things like, where's our public transit going? Are we expanding bus rapid transit? Is there childcare along these routes? Are we talking about, I appreciate bringing up the Amazon example. That seems extremely right now. But is that still going to be a sufficient number of slots? How is that going to meet the need in the community, not just for the workforce coming there, but for people who live there already? And I don't know, you all may be seeing even more concrete examples in your communities right now where there are gaps. That feels like looking back very far and also thinking very high level, and it may not be a specific enough example for Arlington.
So, many faith organizations are able to utilize their spaces to rent to providers during the week. Do you have any particular recommendations or success stories that you've seen communities partner with the faith community in increasing access to affordable childcare?
Well, we are in the floor where Thrive is in the church. We have a early Head Start center there. However, we need one more room because I want to address actually the lack of infant and toddler care in Arlington and everywhere. We operate 2 early Head Start centers here, one at the Arlington Community Center, Arlington Mill Community Center, and one at the basement of the church, not the basement, the first floor of the church, or where Thrive is. And we have 70 families on the wait list. They will never get in. They will never get in. The lack of infant toddler care has got to be addressed. And it will cost them nothing to be in the early Head Start program. They just won't get in because once you get a slot, we serve from pregnant mom until the child turns 3. We can serve 27 kids at each of our slots. That's 54 slots for all of Arlington County for infant toddler program.
So all those families on the wait list are not working. They're taking care of the child, or they've got someone, a neighbor who's unlicensed, they're unskilled.
They still got to go to work.
Yeah. Or they're not working, and then, multi-generational transmission of poverty. Is that what we're supporting in our communities? We can do better.
I have 2 family day home providers on my floor in Arlington for everything. So just one final question before we get to questions from the audience. What is one thing you'd like for our guests to take away from today's conversation?
There are incredible community resources and experts to tap into, and they include some of the folks on stage and their partners and colleagues. And one of the things we can do is work with the intermediaries, the programs, the educators, and the families, and ask them what they need. Ask them about their subsidy applications. Ask them how much childcare costs. Ask our educators how much money they're making. Talk to programs about their bottom line. This doesn't have to be in the abstract. And it also, as much as I love my job, you don't need a national expert to do that kind of work. They're right here, right? And I really appreciate the opportunity to join this panel to talk a little bit about how important childcare is and to hear and learn from them.
What I would like the takeaway to be is that we all become very vigilant about asking the question, why does one of the richest nations in the world not have adequate child care? Could that be?
I would say a takeaway that I would want you to have is that building supportive, trustworthy relationships with families matters. And those partnerships matter. And building on what you were saying, if we're not working with families, and we have a service orientation toward here, take these services and be thankful, families are not going to trust us or caregivers or anyone else who has resources for them without having a relationship. It just doesn't happen. And so they're not taking up the subsidies, if they're not finding the childcare. We have people in the community who can help make those connections, and we need to make those connections for those connections to happen.
I think I'll just go very big picture here, which is to the note that very smart people at Harvard University went through over 125 different pilot programs, interventions, demonstrations of a variety of policies, from tax breaks to education to workforce development, everything that has been tried in the past 50 years. And far and away, they found that the best value on every public dollar spent came in those spent on the health and education of babies, toddlers, preschoolers. We have gotten away with underinvestment in this because we have a system that's subsidized by very hardworking, low-paid women. It's subsidized by churches and nonprofits donating their time and energy and space, by concerned citizens and public servants, doing what they can with what little resources they have. But we haven't yet tried to do this at scale. That's not something necessarily a county or one community can do on its own, but to maybe just carry that story forward. We've done the math, we've tried everything, and we know that investing in young families, in their economic stability, and in the education of their health and education of their children is always worth it.
Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you all. And now I'm going to turn it over to Javi Henry, who is Thrive's childcare coordinator, to take questions from the audience.
Hi. Thank you so much. All of this really resonates and spot on. And I think that it's great to re-energize a conversation that started really many years ago when Katie was leading the childcare initiative. And the elements that you've described are all in the plan, but something has to give, because Arlington's affordability pressures here are just huge. And it's very analogous to our problems with affordable housing. Getting to that much deeper level, not just generally more supply, but much deeper level. So given that, on all the tools you've talked about, mixed delivery, which haven't taken advantage of in Arlington, it would be a great way for our public schools in our county and our community organizations to collaborate and not leave that money on the table. The land use incentives that everyone's talked about, or corporate involvement. There was Katie mentioned that Amazon is incentivizing their vendors to offer some affordable slots. But would you, if you were taking all these options and tools and ideas to Arlington today, what would you prioritize to get somewhere? And I do also want to just mention one more thing about the workforce. We have been pushing to get a pool for retirement and healthcare for childcare workers in Virginia. But again, what could we do locally to move that needle where we've had this very laudable increase in supply that Katie mentioned, but not affordable supply?
So I do want to start by not fully answering your question. I want to say something that I think is important. One of the things about the childcare system is that many of these pieces are interdependent. And so it is hard, right, to say there is a single strategy. If we just increase subsidy, or if we just gave programs grants, that would actually solve what is a widespread issue, right? And so I say that because we see this a lot, right? The journey of a family through the subsidy process is actually a really good example of what this looks like. Okay, you figure out you're qualified for subsidy, then you can't find the slot, then you're on a wait list, then you lose your job, right? So all of those things have to work out. So I hesitate to say that there is one thing to prioritize that will get this done, because if all we prioritize are bricks and mortars, we don't solve the issues around the purchasing power of our subsidy program. If we only prioritize increasing compensation, we may not see a direct increase or a necessary increase in supply for a while as you build the pipeline. So I do think it's important to consider maybe strategies in a couple different buckets and see which can go together. I really appreciate you mentioning the retirement, the healthcare, things like subsidy pools. I have so many questions, and each jurisdiction is different, about the way in which even things like public entities, whether it be the local or county government or the public schools, can offer some of those options. There are states, right, that are opening up their pools or figuring out ways to expand or subsidize within the state's marketplace for healthcare. Anyway, I thank you for giving those examples, though, because I know we didn't really touch on those today. So I'm also sorry for not directly answering your question and making a plea for a couple. I'm sorry, I talked for a long time. I don't know if you all may have a number one on your wish list.
I don't, but because I do think it's multi-pronged. But I agree, we got to start somewhere. We just got to agree on where to start.
Maybe that is advocating for more funding for these kinds of efforts and recognizing how complicated it is with the people who are making those decisions about funding. I mean, I wonder to what extent the people who are making the decisions actually understand the full picture. And we need to be there talking with them, helping them understand it.
I have a question for Dr. DeMolder. I am a former ECE professor for Trinity Washington University, and I have a question regarding what can higher ed do outside of research to support teacher education when we know that getting a college degree may not be an option? What can higher ed do to sort of bridge the gap in that training deficit for our infant toddler teachers specifically?
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer. I'm part of a university that my own daughter could barely afford to go to. And she was a childcare provider for a while she was in school, and she recognized that she wasn't going to be able to make a career of it with healthcare and all that. So she was able to go back and get a social work degree. Not everybody can do that. And even the teachers who are in my program, they're already practicing teachers. The program costs $30,000 for 2 years. And it's just unfathomable to me that schools don't support the professional development of their teachers, and that we as a society don't support the training of teachers to get into the classroom. They're having to pay for pre-service education in order to be able to do that. So I am really good at recognizing the problems. Sometimes I'm not so good at figuring out how to solve that problem because it's so entrenched that higher education is somehow for the elite. And
Also, I think there's a disconnect of information, and I want to shout out to Trinity. I'm a Trinity grad. So I believe the Commonwealth has reinstated the early childhood scholarships. I believe that. But that's on the website, and if you don't know, you don't know.
right.
And I'm pretty sure it's targeted initially to the community colleges, which is a really good place to start in gathering and learning about being a quality childcare teacher. But someone's got to tell you about that. If I'm operating a childcare center, I'm not typically perusing the website to find out what's being offered. So how do you get that information out to all of the childcare centers who cannot afford to attract teachers of higher quality because they have got to get a job to pay for the education that they just got? And so then we run in this circle of having not quality care, and then you can't retain staff. And I don't think that's a good thing for children or families to see a different person in the classroom every day.
There are some examples across the country of places where really cool things are happening. So partnerships are bringing someone from a local college, community college, or university to a program to teach, and then also those educators as assistants in a program are able to get the hours they need. And I mean, how powerful is that, right? This isn't your problem to go out in the community and find a degree program, it is actually a part of how we view supporting educators in the program ourselves. The issue is who makes that happen, right? And I love to imagine that center directors have all the time in the world to design in-service education opportunities. They don't, right? They are cooking, they're cleaning, they're doing paperwork, they're navigating the subsidy system, right? And I do wonder to what extent communities can play a role there, can actually connect all the people, and organizations might know a funder who could help cover the costs or the time. It takes getting creative. Childcare resource and referral agencies sometimes play that role in communities, or they can be a partner in that particular scenario. But I do think there are examples out there. But it again comes back to who makes it happen, and do we just sort of let every individual program, educator, and director hope they find the information they need? I feel like there's a lot more we could be doing.
Some of the local programs actually have grant writers who are doing grant writing all the time. And I'm thinking of the Child and Family Network Center in Alexandria that I've been affiliated with. And they not only have a grant writer, but that grant writer writes into the grant funds to support parents who have had their children or have their children in the program to get professional development and to become assistant teachers in the program. So it's a great model of keeping, parents working in the communities where they care and have their children.
Yeah. My name is Dr. Emma Violan Sanchez, and retired from 40 years working in Arlington Public Schools and the first Latina elected school board member. But now I'm a grandmother of 3 children, ages 1 month and a half, 1 year and 3 months, and a 6-year-old. As a grandmother, I had the privilege of taking care of my oldest child in my home. Now I have the responsibility for my 1 month and a half. But having a son who is a teacher in Arlington, who doesn't have family leave, while my daughter in DC has 8 weeks of family leave, 8 weeks. As a mother who my child ended up in emergency care because I had to go back to work in Arlington Public Schools because my sick leave was gone, and ended up in a hospital because of an allergy that I didn't know to the milk. As an elected official, I advocated for 2 weeks of family leave for Arlington Public Schools employees. The county has more. But in Arlington, one of the richest counties, we do not have family leave. We had a children's school where educators could leave their children from infancy. Now that children's school was taken away from the school system, now my son has to pay $2,300 a month for that children's school. Now you tell me how a teacher in Arlington, an assistant in Arlington, a bus driver in Arlington can have safety for their own infant children. And the lowest income immigrants who take care of their children, they have no benefits, they have no access to their own child care due to their immigration status. So what can Arlington do to demonstrate equity, inclusion in their policies? Their budget is their values.
Yeah, I would like to ask you also a question. We are from a community that how did you reach to the communities? How did you provide this information to the communities? As you just said, that there is 75 people in the list. They're not going to make it. So what is the purpose then? Because we see a lot of families, especially during COVID, we were the ones we help in our community, and we see all the struggles that the parents went. You know, many people, they are well educated, they are computer savvy, they will learn, they will find about these programs. But what about the families that they don't have access to this, or they don't even know the language, or they don't even know how to get into this program? How did you reach to these families, to these communities? Because we're talking about a system that I didn't even know. I'm an advocate, and I'm learning a lot, and I really appreciate the invitations for today. But it's the outreach that I'm worried about. You know, that many families don't have that, luxury or knowing about what you guys talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a kind of part of our childcare system that is unofficially, maybe not, officially maybe it's not part of our what we call our licensed childcare system, but we all understand it's a very important part of the overall landscape of childcare, which is for communities that don't have access to licensed care, they build it themselves through personal connections, through people saying, I'm going to just be a childcare provider for the people who need it in my community, right? And maybe not charge very much money. And maybe maybe it's someone who, if they were contacted, if they were found to be a hub for childcare in their community, but they're not officially licensed, they're not a part of a system. This is something people are always trying to think about is and work on, is ways to help them, to invite them, get them the resources to be a childcare provider in their community that can receive subsidies, that can receive financial support, because otherwise they're just doing it off of their own labor and their own goodwill. You're losing money doing it. I'm always looking for good examples of states or communities that are doing that work, because especially for immigrants, for people who are new to a community, this is something that if you're new to Arlington, you're only getting on wait list. You're like, you had to be signing up when you find out you're having a baby. So that's another part of it.
One of the things that I heard in what you shared is that it sounds like you're a part of a community that's not getting the information it needs about our childcare system. And to me, that seems like a really big, start here for some of the work happening in Arlington. There are examples of programs, and Betsy, you mentioned earlier the way in which we can build navigator or ambassador models in communities. And there are some existing community partners or organizations that are trying to get this information out in the world. It sounds like there are disconnects, that we have not reached all of the trusted community partners that could be getting the information in the hands of parents. So my answer isn't so much that there's something we haven't thought about. It's right here, right? It is, if you are in the room today and you are a part of thinking about how we're reaching families in Arlington, it sounds like there are organizations or people in community who are the right people to connect with and ask, what kind of information do you need? Is it a flyer? Is it in different languages? Is it someone with an iPad who goes to a program at a community event and helps people enroll in the subsidy program? Is it someone who's willing to do that over the phone? The childcare resource and referral agencies that I work with across the country do things like at 8 o'clock at night, they get on the phone and they fill out an application with someone. They do it over text message because that can be done sporadically or asynchronously. These are all things that I think are happening. And when we hear in a community that there's someone who's not being reached, it feels like an opportunity to say, what's the hub, or who's the person, and how do we get the resources in their hands?
Hi, I'm Tanya Talento. Ironically, I was going to actually talk a little bit about Jenna talked about as well. So I'm just going to make it brief and just sort of add on. Jenna and I work together in the community on different things. One of the things that I want you to think about is people like Janet and myself and Dr. Villan Sanchez. We are ambassadors in the community, self-chosen or self-selected by our community members, I suppose, but we are also stretched thin. And so I find that a lot of times we talk about extra funding or who do we find, and we're always looking for that one-stop shop to open the door. But I would like us to think also, as all of you, first of all, thank you for the discussion today, for the value that you brought to us, but also thinking about how we can partner with maybe doctors or hospitals and catch our low-income families when they're pregnant. As a working mother, I had a different childcare arrangement every year. Because when I got pregnant, I was a young mother. I was working. I was a child of immigrant parents. I did not have extended family. And no one told me about waiting lists or anything like that. I'm like, okay, I'm 8 months, 7 months. We should start looking for childcare because the first few months I was trying to figure out how I was going to afford family leave and how I was going to, make sure I had enough leave to go to my prenatal appointments and things like that, right? And then we were in a situation where I had to apply for WIC, right? So here I am, all these things. Oh, wait, now I need childcare. So the first year my sister helped me because she was actually not working and was staying at home, but then she had to get a job. So then the second year I had to find another childcare provider. Then the third year I got connected with a family friend who served as a surrogate mom to my family. But now here I am as a parent trying to figure out how to engage my toddler socially. So I could afford 2 days a week at a local child development center. But thank God I had a car, and at that point had reached a point in my career where I had enough leave to, flex 10 or 15 minutes here. And every year it was different. And then I had to depend on extended day. And so and my parents, the same thing. When they were working, my sister was in a child care development center in DC with my daughter when my sister was 3 months. My mother was doing that. So without these kinds of things, and so when you think about a working class family, they are navigating a map that is full of different pit stops that changes every year. So how can you as advocates and people in your industry find a way to catch our families when they need to? And I love that idea of the map navigation, right? If I had a list of resources, I could have then selected, and maybe I wouldn't have to change every year for my children. And as some of my colleagues have shared, we didn't know the resources, the subsidies, the forms. You're already filling out forms just to pay in affordable housing or to pay rent so it can get overwhelming. So just think about, as you explore new ways to engage and support childcare, you can also think about maybe where we can provide that safety net before they're in the midst and struggling, creating and linking them to these resources. I don't know how much additional funding will help if our families don't have access to it. So I just wanted to add on to what was shared.
If anybody has a solution for all of that in the next 30 to 40 seconds.
The only thing I would say is more funding can also mean funding things like these community partners, the ambassadors, the networks, and things like that. Sometimes this does get lost, right? The system is more than also just educators and programs and families. It's also the organizations that connect the dots and do the work, and places like Arlington Thrive. So maybe that's a good place for us to end.
Well, first of all, I just want to give another hand. Can we give a hand to our panelists? We said that we would be done by 10, and we have about 60 seconds. So here's all I want to say in conclusion is that, first of all, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being late to work or for taking the time out of your day to be here. What we do know is that this is a difficult issue. If it wasn't a difficult issue, we wouldn't have had this panel. We wouldn't have found that 40% of the folks that we helped last year with eviction prevention dollars would have been able to go back to work because they had affordable child care. But that's not what we found. We found that they could not go back to work. We also hope that we weren't going to find too many things that we didn't know today, but that we would find a way to coalesce and convene different ideas that might catalyze new ideas. And that's what we wanted to do today, to be a catalyst for new energy, because a lot of these things we did know. And as Anne and others have said, there are things that we can do on the local level, even if it is hard. And so if we wait for the state or if we wait for the federal government, which is probably the only way that we really address this systemically, we're going to be waiting too long. We're going to be having generational poverty. We're going to be having generational failure. And we've had enough of that. And so what can we do? What can Arlington Thrive do? What can the Community Foundation? What can all of us do to be chipping away at it? A person here, a program there, a church here, a provider there, a subsidy slot here, an extra room there. Because it's great to have a navigator and to know about this information, but if we have 70 people on the wait list, we can communicate it, but all we're telling you is to put on a wait list that you'll never get off of. So we have to find a way to chip away, as Dr. DeMolder said, at multiple aspects of the problem. And whether it's those buckets or the other buckets, whatever buckets we're looking at, we know that it can't be done in a silo, whether it's silos of communities or silos of constituencies. I'm so happy that we had such leadership here today from the public schools because we know that they are a key part of this conversation. I'm so happy that we had providers here. I'm so happy that we had nonprofits here. I'm so happy that we had county leadership here today. But it's going to take every single person, including some funding, which we're going to get to, but not today, and that we are going to work on that. And we also know, and we heard this, especially through some of these comments, but that we also know that we need the families and the providers in these conversations. We have very smart people, but we also need the very smart people who are living with these issues every day. Because we don't get to decide what's best and what's right and then say, go live with these choices. Those are the people, and these are the people, it's the parents, like those of us who've had children. We, as Tanya just said, they are the ones who have to figure it out every day. And so our job is to listen and then try to find solutions that actually work instead of find solutions and then hope that they work. So I hope that today, with all of this amazing knowledge, all this amazing energy and resource, this can be a catalyst. That's our charge internally. We've been saying for weeks, okay, I think we got enough people in the room, got enough bagels. So now what is going to be the after action? Where do we go from here? Because it's great to have a great meeting. I feel good. I hope you've met some great people. My LinkedIn is longer. I've met some really wonderful contacts. But unless we come out of here and do something with this, then we'll say that was a nice meeting. So I ask you, I ask my team, I ask my board, I ask all of us, where do we go from here? So that is what I ask you to take away from today as we go forward. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you to our panelists, and thank you to our team and our staff, and thank you for all that you do for our community. Have a great rest of your day.